welcome back. We have a new day. It's Monday, but it's vacation day. I don't know what to say in English. It's a Monday, but it's still it's a holiday, like Christmas something. It's a Christian vacation day. I don't know how to translate in Danish, but let's read some more. I'm still trying to make some video about history of the cars in my language Danish. And they have this kind of steam tractors. Yes, I need a minute to go to my bed. So they are looking very interesting. This Showmans wrote steam locomotives.
Showmans road locomotive. Nighttime view of Showmans engines at the Great Dorset Steam Fair 2007. The Iron Maiden, a preserved Showmans engine. A Showmans road locomotive or Showmans engine is a steam-powered road-going locomotive designed to provide power and transport for a travelling funfair or circus. Similar to other road-going traction engines, Showmans engines were normally distinguished by the addition of a full-length canopy, a dynamo mounted in front of the chimney, and brightly colored paintwork with ornate decorations. The dynamo was used to generate electricity to illuminate and power various fairground rides. Although originally the ride's motion was powered by an internal steam engine, some later rides were driven direct from fair Showmans engine via a belt drive. Showmans road locomotives were built in varying sizes, from relatively small 5, 6 and 7 nhp engines, right up to large 8 or 10 nhp engines. Probably the most popular design was the Burrell 8 nhp single-crank compound design. The far greater distances involved meant they never caught on in the United States, where a combination of trains and horses was preferred. 1. History. A Bray engine featured as part of a fairground parade, but this doesn't appear to have had any wider impact. 2. Prior to the introduction of the Showmans engine, some fairs used lightweight steam engines with generators mounted in them to provide power for lighting. 3. These were marketed as electric light engines. 3. One of the earliest engines ordered directly from the manufacturers by a showman was a Burrell number 1451 Monarch, built in 1889. 4. Before the advent of these Showmans road locomotives, all of the rides were drawn in transit by teams of horses. This was very labor-intensive, and substantially restricted the size of rides. Production of Showmans engines tailed off in the late 1920s, with the last Burrell Simplicity being built by Garrett's of Leiston in 1930. The decline was due to the rise of diesel trucks, initially helped by the availability of large numbers of former military vehicles at the end of World War I. 1. A 1927 Act of Parliament reduced road tax payments if the engine had rubber tires, which resulted in them becoming nearly universal. 1. The last Showmans engine to be built was Fowler Supreme, one of the Super Lions. It was completed for Mrs. Deakin, who also bought Simplicity, in March 1934. Fowler attempted to continue with a similar line of diesel engines, but it was not a success and only a single example was built. 1. Showman's engine saw the end of non-preservation use in the 1950s. 5. 107 survived into preservation. 5. Characteristic features. Richard Garrett and Sons compound Showmans tractor at Netley Marsh Steam and Craft Show. In general, Showmans road locomotives share much the same design and technology as other road-going traction engines. However, Certain features set the Showmans engine apart. Ornate painting. Most were painted in bright colors. The Burrell standard was lake crimson with deep yellow wheels. George Tubey's engines were distinctively painted Great Eastern blue with yellow wheels and lining. Other embellishments included elaborate scroll paintings. This was especially popular around the start of the 20th century. Typically the sideboards had the name of either the proprietor or off-right. The engines were working with picked out in gold. Brass decoration. Most engines have simple steel rods for roof supports, but Showman's engines employ a more flamboyant twisted design, usually of polished brass. Brass stars and other decoration were often mounted on the motion covers and water tanks. Dynamo. This was driven by a belt from the engine's flywheel and powered the lighting on the rides and stalls, and often the rides themselves. The power varied with the NHP of the engine. Typically a smaller 5-horse, 5 NHP engine would have a small 110 V dynamo, with the larger Scenic engines having a large 110 V DC, direct current, dynamo and smaller 80 V exciter. Full-length canopy. Most road locomotives have some kind of roof or canopy fitted, covering the man stand, where the driver operates the controls, and the crankshaft area. The canopy of a Showman's engine extends forward of the chimney to protect the dynamo from rain ingress. They are often fitted with a string of lights along the perimeter to enhance the effect at night, this being more common in preservation than before. Extension chimney. An extra tube is carried for extending the chimney when stationary. This tube could be between 6 and 8 feet, 1.8 and 2.4 m, long, depending on the size of the engine. The chimney tube is carried on purpose-made brackets on the roof. The extra length of chimney improves the draft through the fire, and reduces the risk of smoke and smuts being blown around nearby fairgoers. Crane. Many of the Scenic engines were built with, or at some time had fitted, a large boom crane fitted to the tender. This was used for erecting the rides and moving items, such as gondola cars, from place to place. Disc flywheel. Most road locomotives were fitted with disc flywheels, the idea of this being if they encountered horses en route, the horse would be less startled by the spinning disc. This theory was pretty much ruined when Showman began to decorate the flywheels, worsening the startling effect. Subtypes. Showman's tractors. Showman's tractors were basically miniaturized versions of their larger counterparts. Many were reconstructed following government legislation increasing weight limits at 7 tons, so at between 5 and 7 tons, these engines were very popular. Again, Burrell was a prolific manufacturer, as was William Foster, but the market leader was probably Garrett's of Leiston with a Showman's engine based on their popular 4CD tractor design. Special Scenic engines. The Fowler No 15653 renown fitted with a crane at the back for loading cars onto the ride. Special Scenic engines were perhaps the ultimate development of Showman's road locomotive. Built almost solely by Burrells of Thetford, Fowler built just one experimental engine. These were developed for the heavier rides that were emerging. Basically, a Special Scenic engine has a second dynamo located behind the chimney, known as an exciter. 6. This extra dynamo helped to start the heavy new Scenic rides. 6. In order to drive the belt for the extra dynamo, the flywheel was made wider. 6. The first engine to be built new as a Special Scenic was number 3827 Victory. Supplied to Charles Thurston of Norwich in 1920, this engine is now preserved in the Thursford collection in Norfolk. Showman's steam wagons. Although less common than the tractors or larger locomotives, Showman soon cottoned on to the idea of converting the conventional steam wagons for showland use. Fodens were probably the most popular cause Burrell's only ever sold one wagon specifically built for a showman. No 3883 Electra was built in 1921 for Charles Summers of Norwich. It was later sold to an operator in Plymouth, but was later destroyed in World War II by the Nazi Blitz of the city. Manufacturers. One of the most prolific manufacturers of these vehicles was Charles Burrell of Thetford, Norfolk. The later 8 NHP engines were held in very high regard by their operators. Other major manufacturers included John Fowler and Company of Leeds and William Foster and Company of Lincoln. Other manufacturers made lesser ventures into the Showmans engine market. These included Wallace and Stevens of Basingstoke, Fodens of Sunbach and Aveling and Porter of Rochester, Kent. Fowler B6 Super Lion. Fowler Supreme, and alongside it there created Onward at Carter's Steam Fair in May 2016. In the early 1930s, when steam on the roads was in decline, Fowler's, under advice from Sidney Harrison of Burrell's, produced 4 of the most sophisticated Showmans road locomotives ever constructed. Incorporating many features of the popular Burrell design, they were steam's finale. The first was number 19782, the Lion, built in March 1932 for Anderton and Rowland of Bristol. In April of the same year, number 19783 King Carnival 2 was supplied to Frank McConville of West Hartlepool. The third engine, number 19989 Onward, was built for Samuel Ingham of Cheshire. The last of the, and indeed the last Showman's engine ever constructed, was No. 20223 Supreme, built in March 1934 for Mrs. Adekin. 3 of these engines survived into preservation, with Supreme and King Carnival 2 on road haulage duties for their last days in commercial use. Onward was the unlucky engine, being cut up in 1946. However, a faithful replica of Onward was completed in 2016. Conversions. As well as genuine factory-built engines, a great number of engines were converted from conventional road locomotives to full Showman's engines by both the showman and by private concerns, like Openshaw's. Most of the converted engines were ex-war Dept Fowlers and McLarens. Others were powerful contractors type road locomotives. Many of these were a cheap and powerful alternative to factory models, and they were plentiful following World War I. This extended beyond British manufacturers, with own showmen using a Kemner engine in the 1920s. As well as full conversions, showmen were also experts in adding extra dynamos, or fitting their own designs of crane and canopies. This led to a world of variation in the engines. Some homemade designs are better than others, but many have survived. Due to the demand and prestige attached to Showman's engines, in recent years a number of engines, mainly road rollers, have been converted by preservationists. This practice is causing concern amongst some enthusiasts, as in some cases unique examples of some models have been lost. In a few cases, owners have converted engines back during restoration to their original form. 8. Famous showman owners. Although hundreds of Showland families operated Showman's engines, a few are worthy of note. Pat Collins and family operated well over 25 Showman's engines. Although predominantly Burrells, he also owned various Fowlers and other makes. Charles Thurston and family operated a large number of engines from both Burrells and Fosters. A number of their engines have been preserved. Foster's Admiral Beatty and Burrell's Britannia were owned by William Thurston. A unique set of 4 of Charles Thurston's engines have been preserved at the Thursford Collection in Norfolk. These are all Burrells. King Edward VII of 1905, Victory of 1920, Unity and Alexandra. George Thomas Tubey operated a fleet of 7 Burrell Showman's engines, most of which carried names according to the position of Tubey in the local government. These included councillor, alderman, mayor and surviving ex-mayor or preservation. Fowler Showmans wrote Locomotive Evening Star, 1917. The last Showmans engine in commercial showland use was in 1958. Before this engines were being sold for scrap for next to nothing. George Cushing, founder of the Thursford collection, bought Victory, Alexandra and Unity for around £40 each. For comparison, a similar engine number 3865 number 1 was sold at auction in 2003 for £320,000. Towards the end of the 1930s, engines were simply becoming out of date. With the ending of the Second World War came hundreds of cheap and powerful ex-army lorries replaced the Showman's engines, making them obsolete. Although many of these engines were scrapped, a good number of them have survived into preservation. Many appear at rallies all over the UK, others are in museums such as Thursford, or the Hollycombe Collections. See also. Carousel. References.
Good. I will stop the video and make a video about this in my language, Danish.